Ethan Marlowe had everything, money, charm, and a future most people could only dream of, until the night he beat his mother, Vivian Marlowe, to death in the mansion she built for him, then fell to his knees crying for his mama as if she could still forgive him. Ethan Marlowe grew up in a world where everything seemed perfect. His house sat at the top of Ridgeview Hill, overlooking the small town of Willow Creek like a castle above its kingdom. The Marlowe mansion was the kind of place people slowed down to stare at. Tall white columns, a fountain in the driveway, and a row of imported roses that bloomed even in winter. Inside, the air always smelled faintly of lavender and lemon polish. The floors gleamed like mirrors, and the walls were covered with framed photos of Ethan smiling beside his mother, Vivian Marlowe. To anyone looking in, they were a picture of success and happiness. Vivian was a real estate powerhouse, known for closing deals that others thought impossible. She had started with nothing and built a fortune that put her among the wealthiest women in the county. Her husband, Charles, had been an investment banker, but after his sudden death when Ethan was only 9, she carried the weight of their world alone. She poured everything she had into her son. Ethan became the center of her universe, the reason she worked, the reason she smiled, and the reason she never stopped pushing. At school, Ethan had the life everyone envied. He wore designer sneakers, carried the latest phone, and drove a new sports car before he even had his full license. Teachers described him as intelligent but distracted. He was good-looking, confident, and used to getting what he wanted. Classmates either admired him or feared him. It depended on which version of Ethan they met that day. There were times he could be charming, generous, even funny. But there were other times when his temper flared over the smallest things. People noticed strange patterns around him. A friend's skateboard mysteriously snapped after an argument. A teacher's car tire was slashed the same week Ethan was caught cheating on a test. Once, at a party, he punched a hole through a wall because someone joked about his father. Everyone laughed it off. They said, "That's just Ethan. He's been through a lot." At home, the cracks in perfection ran deeper. Vivian expected Ethan to mirror her success, to be disciplined and driven, to achieve everything she never could at his age. She kept a tight grip on his future. Every grade, every friend, every decision. Ethan, who had once adored her, started feeling trapped. Their conversations turned into arguments. Her praise became criticism. Her concern felt like control. He wanted to live his own life, but she wanted him to follow her plan. Still, to outsiders, the Marlowes seemed untouchable. Their smiles were rehearsed, their appearances flawless. When the town's annual charity gala came around, they arrived in matching black outfits, dazzling under the lights. No one saw how cold the air between them had become. No one saw Ethan's clenched jaw or Vivian's trembling hands. In Willow Creek, perfection was easy to fake. The mansion on Ridgeview Hill shone like a symbol of success, but behind its bright windows, the golden boy of Willow Creek was already breaking. The cracks were spreading, invisible but unstoppable, waiting for the night when everything would finally shatter. The night the Marlowe house fell silent began like any other. Rain rolled down the windows, the sky dark and heavy with thunder. The mansion glowed faintly from the inside, its warmth contrasting the storm outside. Ethan sat in the living room, the television flickering across his tired face. Half-empty bottles lined the coffee table, and the smell of alcohol hung thick in the air. He had been suspended from school that afternoon for cheating on an exam. The call had gone to his mother, who was attending a charity gala across town. She had left early, furious and embarrassed. By the time Vivian's car pulled into the driveway, Ethan was already pacing. The storm outside seemed to echo the storm building inside him. Vivian entered quietly, still wearing her black gown, her heels tapping against the marble floor. She placed her purse on the counter and found her son waiting at the base of the stairs. He looked restless, his eyes red, his jaw tight. For a few long seconds, neither of them moved. What happened next would later be pieced together through evidence. not witnesses. The neighbors heard faint shouting through the rain, a crash, and then silence. Inside the house, the confrontation grew louder. Vivian's anger, buried for years, finally erupted. Ethan's resentment, boiling beneath the surface, exploded. The argument moved from the living room to the kitchen, where glass shattered and furniture scraped against the floor. The sound of thunder masked the chaos until everything stopped all at once. When the police arrived later that night, they found Vivian lying motionless beside the kitchen island, her hair tangled, her face pale. A trail of blood smeared across the white marble led to a fallen lamp, a broken phone, and shards of crystal from a shattered vase. Ethan was found crouched beside her, his hands shaking, his face streaked with tears. He was whispering her name, begging her to wake up. His shirt was stained, his knuckles bruised. Officers reported that he looked dazed, almost like he didn't understand what had happened. When they tried to pull him away, he clung to her body, crying for his mother as though the word could bring her back. The kitchen lights flickered from the storm as the paramedics tried to revive her, but it was too late. Vivian Marlowe was pronounced dead at the scene. News spread through Willow Creek within hours. By morning, flashing police lights illuminated the mansion at the top of the hill, and reporters gathered at the gates. No one could believe it. The perfect family, the golden boy, the picture of success. It didn't make sense. Neighbors spoke of how kind Vivian had been, how devoted she was to her son, how they had seen her smiling just the day before. Others mentioned hearing shouting before, the occasional broken object, the hint of something not quite right. As the storm cleared and the sun rose, the Marlowe mansion stood silent. The garden fountain still ran, the roses still bloomed, but inside, everything had changed. The marble floors that once shone with perfection were now stained with tragedy. The golden boy of Willow Creek had crossed a line he could never return from. And the house that once symbolized everything good about the Marlowe name had become a monument to the night perfection turned into horror. Detectives arrived at the Marlowe mansion before dawn, their flashlights sweeping across polished floors now marked with evidence tape. The air inside was still heavy, the scent of rain mixing with something metallic. Officers moved quietly through the rooms, collecting fragments of the night before. The house, once spotless, looked like a crime scene from a nightmare. Broken glass, overturned chairs, and the trail of blood that led from the living room to the kitchen. Nothing about it matched the image the Marlowes had spent years presenting to the world. Ethan was taken into custody just after 4 in the morning. His hands trembled as they cuffed him, and he kept asking the same question over and over, his voice hoarse and hollow. He didn't seem to understand that his mother was gone. When he was brought to the station, he sat in silence for hours, staring at the wall as rainwater dripped from his hair. Officers who saw him said he looked more lost than dangerous, but the crime scene told another story. The investigation revealed that what happened that night wasn't an isolated explosion of anger. Over the following days, detectives uncovered a history of tension buried beneath the family's perfect image. Vivian's phone contained messages she had sent to a close friend, describing her fear that Ethan was not the same anymore. She mentioned his temper, his drinking, and her growing worry that he might hurt himself or someone else. Ethan's own phone told a different version of the story. Dozens of messages to classmates complaining about his mother, calling her controlling, saying he wanted to get out and take his inheritance early. Forensics found signs of earlier violence inside the house. A cracked picture frame in Ethan's room contained tiny blood traces from weeks before. Holes in the drywall, hastily covered with posters, matched the pattern of his hand. Even the housekeeper, who had worked there for years, told detectives she had heard shouting and crashes in recent months, but had been told to mind her business. The town's disbelief slowly began to turn into curiosity, then gossip. News crews lined the gates, and headlines painted Ethan as both a villain and a victim. Some called it the collapse of privilege, others a tragedy of pressure and perfection. The story spread far beyond Willow Creek, every detail dissected by strangers who had never met him. As police pieced together the timeline, they discovered that the fight started after Vivian confronted him about his suspension. The bottle he'd been drinking from was found shattered beside her body. A blood-stained kitchen utensil lay near her hand, possibly used as a weapon in the struggle. The evidence suggested the attack was not premeditated, but it was brutal. When Ethan was finally questioned, his statements were inconsistent. He claimed not to remember parts of the night, then broke down in tears. Investigators noted that he cried for his mother constantly, repeating her name, begging for forgiveness from someone who could no longer answer. By the end of the week, the police officially charged him with second-degree murder. The town that once saw Ethan Marlowe as the perfect son now saw him through a very different lens. The mansion on Ridgeview Hill became a symbol of what hid behind closed doors, the silence, the pressure, and the secrets that money could no longer protect. The trial of Ethan Marlowe began 6 months after his arrest, drawing crowds that filled every seat in the courthouse. People who once admired the Marlowe family now stood outside with cameras and microphones, waiting for any glimpse of the boy who had once been the pride of Willow Creek. The courthouse itself seemed charged with tension, every whisper echoing like thunder. When Ethan entered the courtroom for the first time, dressed in a plain gray suit, he looked smaller than anyone remembered. His once perfect hair was unkempt, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. The confident smile that used to charm everyone was gone. The prosecution presented its case with cold precision. They described Ethan as a spoiled young man whose sense of entitlement had turned dangerous. They played the 911 recording where his voice cracked as he cried for his mother, arguing that his tears were not from guilt, but fear of the consequences. The medical examiner's report detailed the extent of Vivian Marlowe's injuries, fractures, bruises, and the fatal blow that ended her life. The jury listened in silence as photographs were displayed on the screen, showing the blood-stained marble that had once been the heart of their perfect home. Prosecutors argued that years of privilege had shielded Ethan from accountability. They painted him as someone used to getting his way, someone who couldn't handle hearing the word no. They said his anger had built up over time, fed by resentment toward a mother who refused to let him live on his own terms. When she confronted him that night, they claimed he lashed out in rage that had been waiting to erupt. The defense offered a very different picture. They spoke of a boy who had grown up under impossible expectations, a child who had lost his father too young and was raised in a house ruled by perfection. They described Vivian as loving but demanding, and Ethan as a teenager crumbling under pressure. The defense psychologist testified that Ethan suffered from emotional instability and deep depression, worsened by years of loneliness. They said the killing was not deliberate, but a moment of uncontrolled panic, the breaking point of a fragile mind. Throughout the trial, Ethan sat mostly motionless. He rarely looked up except when photos of his mother appeared on the screen. Witnesses described how close they once were, how she bragged about him constantly, how he called her his best friend when he was younger. The contrast between that image and the one before them now was unbearable. Some jurors wiped tears as the defense read excerpts from Ethan's childhood journals, filled with lines about wanting to make his mother proud. After weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the air in the courtroom was heavy. Ethan kept his head bowed as the verdict was read, guilty of second-degree murder. A soft gasp rippled through the room. He didn't move, didn't cry, didn't speak. Only when the judge announced his sentence, 25 years in prison, did his shoulders shake. As he was led away, flashes from cameras burst through the windows. The town that once celebrated his every achievement now watched his fall in silence. The golden boy of Willow Creek was gone, replaced by a ghost of himself, trapped between guilt and grief. The trial ended, but for those who had known the Marlowes, the echoes of that night never faded. Years passed, but the shadow of the Marlowe tragedy never lifted from Willow Creek. The mansion on Ridgeview Hill stood empty behind its rusting gates, its windows dark and its gardens overgrown. The once bright fountain had dried up, leaving only cracked stone and fallen leaves. Locals whispered that strange sounds came from the property at night, soft echoes of footsteps on marble, faint cries carried by the wind. Some said they had seen a flicker of light through the upstairs window, though there was no electricity connected anymore. No one dared go close after dark. After Ethan's conviction, the estate went into probate. Relatives fought quietly over what was left of the fortune, and soon the house was abandoned. The perfect image the Marlowes had built dissolved into gossip and cautionary tales. Children in Willow Creek grew up hearing the story of the rich boy who lost everything. The Marlowe name, once associated with elegance and success, became a reminder of what could happen when money hid misery. Inside prison walls, Ethan Marlowe lived in a different kind of silence. Gone were the expensive clothes, the endless luxury, the admiration that once surrounded him. His days were reduced to a strict routine: early wake-ups, assigned labor, and nights spent in a small concrete cell. He was known among inmates as quiet and withdrawn, rarely speaking unless spoken to. Guards said he spent hours sitting by the window, staring out at the narrow patch of sky. He never spoke of his crime, but every year on the anniversary of his mother's death, he refused his meals and stayed in his bunk, unmoving. Over time, he began to write letters, not to friends or relatives, but to his mother. The letters filled pages of a small notebook he kept hidden beneath his mattress. In them, he described dreams where she still walked through the halls of their house, smiling the way she used to. He wrote about the guilt that clawed at him every time he closed his eyes, about the way her voice echoed in his head when he tried to sleep. Each letter began the same way, with the word "Mama." Each one ended the same way, with an apology she would never read. The town moved on, but the story never really disappeared. New families moved into Willow Creek, and teenagers who hadn't been born when it happened dared each other to climb the hill and touch the Marlowe gates. Reporters returned every few years to film documentaries, to dig up the past and ask what had gone wrong. Some said the tragedy was born from wealth, others from loneliness, and some believed it was simply the inevitable result of two people trapped by love that had turned to resentment. The mansion still stands, its walls cracked, but its frame untouched. It watches over the town like a monument to everything that went wrong behind perfect appearances. Inside, the silence remains thick, and though no one lives there, it feels inhabited by memories that refuse to fade. Somewhere, miles away, Ethan Marlowe continues to serve his sentence, still writing to the mother he destroyed, still calling out for her in the darkness of his cell. The boy who once had everything is left only with her name and the endless echo of a night that can never be undone.